CPI report, Child Protection in Iowa, brought to you by Vocal, Victims of Child Abuse Laws. You can watch our program on Mediacom Channel 15, Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and again on Wednesday evening at 9:30. You can email us at vocaliowa@mchsi.com. My telephone number is area code 515-276-3956, and John's number here in Des Moines, 515-282-2672. My name is Don Burgmaier, and with me at the controls is my co-host,
John Harvey, and welcome to the CPI report. CPI, that stands for Child Protection in Iowa. There are a couple of basic parts of our task. Number one is it is our intention to influence public policy as it relates to child protection issues in Iowa. It's also a part of our duties to work with people who call for some assistance as they face problems with the Department of Human Services and with the juvenile court. We're only too happy to share whatever information we can, but we're not lawyers, so we don't prepare your papers for you. We don't appear in court before the bar to argue your case, but we are really pleased when we can sit down with you and show you how to do your own case. It's a frightening thing, but you have two major assets. Number one, you have the knowledge about your case that exceeds the knowledge of anyone else in the world. Secondly, you have the desire to find relief in your case like no one else in the world does. And you can do this with or without an attorney. Some people feel more comfortable with an attorney. Some people cannot afford an attorney and are left with only their own resources to attack these problems on their own. And we found out that when you're talking to the Department of Human Services, that the people who go in for evidentiary hearings do as good a job without an attorney as those who do. So you can choose for yourself whether you want to keep the $12,000 or whether and do it on your own, or whether you want to give up the big bucks to fight a case. One of the problems that we're seeing as we look into the system of courts and the administrative system at Department of Human Services is that it's a corrupt system. There are not many people who have a real strong desire to do anything about a corrupt system, simply to live with it. However, we have one person here on this team, this vocal team, who is insistent that the courts shape up, that they become accountable. And the person who does that, because no one else is willing to take up the task, is a gentleman by the name of Terrance Walker. Here now is Terrance Walker.
Well, thanks a lot, John. I appreciate your warm reception, your warm introduction. As always, I'm sometimes I'm sitting there like, well, who's he talking about? But I appreciate the great introduction all the time. But you guys do a tremendous job as it pertains to protective services and rights as they pertain to parents and their children. But I highlight a lot of the things that need to be done in the state of the judiciary and the justice system as it pertains to us average citizens. And it's interesting you said we're part of a team, because that's what we need to really take this in the light of, when we look at the justice system, because a lot of people are fascinated by sports, but we fail to realize that when we go to a courtroom, we're treated like a sport. It's usually one team versus the other team, but if you don't have an attorney on your team, you can best believe that you're probably not going to get treated fairly. And who wants to go see their favorite team go to at their favorite sporting event, whatever it is, soccer, baseball, football. We just had the Super Bowl a few weeks back. Who would want to go to their favorite game and instead of seeing a healthy competition between the teams, get to see a referee blatantly call all kind of nonsensical calls and basically have your team lose? Well, that's what happens in today's courts. And unfortunately, not a lot of people get to realize that in this country until they actually witness it firsthand in a court proceeding, how you go into the court proceeding and your issue gets ignored. How would you like to go and, you know, how many people's got a traffic ticket before and, you fight the traffic ticket and, you win, but, say the judge says, well, you got to pay the court costs. Well, if you win, you shouldn't have to pay the court costs. These are the kind of things I'm talking about, but those are the kind of things that I would think that the average ordinary citizen would understand. But a lot of times you don't experience it until you actually go into the courtroom firsthand. Now there's some pressing issues from the state of the judiciary. I didn't get to talk about this much last time we were on the show. State of the Judiciary speech was just had and done by Chief Justice Marcia Terrance of the Iowa Supreme Court this past month in January. She spoke upon a lot of good things, and she delivered a pretty good presentation as it pertains to kids and the child justice system and the juvenile court system, and some of the pressing things that are needed there. One of the things of interest and concern that I had to talk about that she delivered an address on was her assessment of the status of the court system, and she talked about the equal justice to all. And she states that the premise of equal justice to all people involves two principles: access to justice and impartial justice. And she goes on to state that there are many steps we can provide and facilitate access to courts, and she basically addressed several issues in that regard. One was judicial resources. The other one was also focused on the issue of part-time magistrates, and also ensuring a high-caliber judiciary. I want to deal with the part-time magistrates and her assessment of a high-caliber judiciary. Now, when she talks about the part-time magistrates, she's talking about how she wants to have a study from a task force that will actually assess what changes should they be made as it pertains to the magistrate system here in Iowa. And the magistrates are basically the lowest tier of a judge, or they're not necessarily termed a judge. They can also, I think they could still actually be a part-time practicing attorney as well. But they handle a lot of the nitty-gritty cases. In a lot of the rural areas, they handle a lot of the cases, a lot of the small cases and tickets and all that. Wide-ranging, broad set of authorities and duties that they have. But she also talks about ensuring a high-caliber judiciary. Now, I wanted to focus on the magistrate assessment and the task force assessment. What she recommends from the Iowa Supreme Court recommended was they basically have set forth in motion a task force which includes 4 legislators: Senator Keith Creeman, Senator Larry McKibben, Representative Rick Olson, and Representative Richard Anderson, as well as representatives from the judiciary, the legal community, law enforcement, and local government. And they are supposed to study and share with the courts their recommendations for improvement of the magistrate system. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that there is one important piece of the puzzle that's missing from the task force. Um, how about the people that have to go to court on a day-to-day basis? Um, we don't have any representation, and this is supposed to be. We're supposed to be embarking on the goal of equal justice to all. Yet, when we try to assess and change the system, we can't focus on those people that we are supposed to provide equal justice to, which is the citizenry. So I do find that to be an area of concern and troubling, and that we have no input from the citizenry on this task force and the study thereof. And I would equate that to, I don't know how many people out there have, a lot of people have phone service. Some people even have cable service. Now, how would you like it if you called in to your phone or cable provider and they said, well, at the end of our call, after your customer service issue has been resolved, we'd like for you to participate in a 2-minute survey to assess the quality of your service. Well, how would you like it if they said, well, unless you work for the phone company or the cable company, your input doesn't matter. Well, that's essentially what they are doing. They're telling us, the citizen, that our input does not matter. We're going to study this amongst ourselves. We're going to, our phone company and our employees and the CEOs, we're going to study this issue ourselves, and we're going to determine if we provide good service to you or not. That's basically the sum total of what's being done there, and I think that's travesty, and I think it's very very bad foresight for her to embark on that path when it pertains to assessing what needs to be changed. Because we, as a citizenry, I mean, this is more important than a customer service issue. This is our rights. We go to court every day as it pertains to our life, liberty, and property, and we deal in the courts and expect the courts to deal fairly with us as it pertains to these matters. Now, if we don't have any input as it respects the system, then we are not going to, more likely than not, be treated fairly and receive good customer service. So I think that that was a lack of oversight, and probably intentionally done, because they don't like to give us, a citizenry, a say-so as it pertains to the justice system. One other thing I'd like to touch on is that Chief Justice Terrance, she goes on to state that the important element of ensuring equal justice is a high caliber judiciary, and she goes on to state how the judicial merit selection system ensures that our judges are as fair and impartial as possible. And she doesn't lay forth any claim to that, other than to say that she's talked with other chief justices from other states who hold Iowa's judiciary in high regard. Well, anybody that had any 2 cents of analytical ability would see that as a fallacy. If we're the citizenry and we're the customer, who cares what another cable company or phone company does? If the cable company and the phone company ask their brother fellow cable company or phone company, well, do you think we're a good competitor? Do you think that we do good business by our customers? Well, of course they'll say yes. But if they don't ask the customer, then that little bit of advice or opinion really doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot, in my opinion, because you have left out the primary constituent that you have, which is the citizenry. And I would just like to also add one more thing. There is no element that is left to actually keep these judges. And let's assume that they are good judges. It's merit selection ensures that we have the cream of the crop of the judges. Let's assume that's the case. What, in fact, are the what is the judicial system doing to making sure that once we get these so-called good people, that they're staying good people? If the old adage by Laura Acton says that absolute power corrupts absolutely is true, then we're in a dilemma if we don't do anything to ensure that these judges stay good people. Because if they don't have any input from the judiciary, if they're totally independent and they're insulated, they don't even take input from the people and the citizenry, then how are we going to maintain that they stay good people given all that absolute power? And I would say that one way we could do that is by continually educating our judges, continually enlightening our judges, and allowing for citizen input to our judicial system and justice system. Um, and that's something that's actually on the burner. Actually, the federal judiciary does basically allow for judges to be educated and to be reimbursed for their judicial education on a continual basis. And I think that we need to also look at that for our state judges and to ensure that we do adhere to the principles of equal justice to all. But yeah, that's basically all I had to say for. I know we have a packed show full of some other
Okay.
little bit of snippets from this and that and the other.
You bet.
But I thought I would touch on that from our state of the judiciary. That's my state of the judiciary, and that's what we need. I think we need to be doing with the judiciary.
Good enough. Well, thank you for that commentary on the Chief Justice's plans for our state. I know that she has a few plans for the juvenile court system, and she wants children actually to show up in court if they're 8 years old. They're a part of this court system, or they're a part of their case, and they shouldn't be left in the dark with respect to what's going on in their family, whether it's a divorce case or whether it's a China case or whatever. She wants the children there, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Because I've heard of children, 15, 16 years old, that have no idea what's going on. And the only thing they get is just snippets of gossip or whatever they can pick up, and that's a sad situation. I attended recently a conference of the Network of Iowa Christian Home Educators and picked up a few pieces of videotape that seem to be that may be of some interest. One of those interests deals with something called parental rights. Parental rights, and there's an organization that's set up called parentalrights.org that is a subsidiary of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association outfit. They've learned the hard way that their task in protecting homeschool families is far broader than just protecting them or seizing or protecting the rights of a homeschool family to homeschool and to look after the laws that would encroach upon parental rights. So they've opened up a whole new field of activity on their part, and we're going to listen to a fellow by the name of Scott Woodruff, who is a representative of Homeschool Legal Defense here in Iowa. Scott Woodruff is telling us a little bit about the problems that could arise if we do not pass a constitutional amendment that protects parental rights. And you can look up the details on this and to find a petition that you can sign. You can join this organization and help in that effort to protect parental rights. I think when the Constitution was framed, no one bothered to even conceive of a situation where parental rights would ever be questioned. Now it's down to the point where, uh, uh, while they may agree that there are such things as parental rights, that if that right is not described as a fundamental right, then you cannot exercise it. And so such things as compulsory school education and setting the schedules and setting the academic standards and so forth that is different from what the parents would like, that becomes a mandatory takeover of a parental right. And where those collide is where homeschoolers have found some difficulties. Because in one state, for an example, they want every person to take the test, the same test. Well, that means that you're going to be teaching the government school kids from their curriculum and teaching um, homeschool children from their curriculum, and the test is written by the government school teachers. Obviously, it's going to reflect what they should be learning at the government school, and not taking into account the differences in the curriculum at the home school. Well, let's take a listen to Scott Woodruff from Homeschool Legal Defense. We'll see if we can dial him up and listen to what he has to say about parental rights. Come on, Scott, speak up. Well, it looks like we're having a little audio difficulty here. I don't know what the problem is here, but we'll see if we can straighten that out. Well, we'll start that over again here, see if we can. Don't usually have much in the way of problems here with our audio. Usually we're able to crank that right up and getting it going. Yeah, we'll see what happens here. Well, it doesn't sound like we're going to get any sound out of Scott Woodruff. Yeah, running into. Don't usually have a whole lot of technical difficulties in this department.
Let's go back and reflect upon one other story that I was going to it's actually about the amendment to the federal judiciary
Let's see, we're
pay raise bill.
okay. You're
Did you
picking
get?
up on pay raise bill. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, a lot of times in the legislature, what they'll do is they'll tack on some measure to another bill to, you know, kind of make something, to either get something to ride along with another bill, or to actually derail a bill from becoming a law. One such attempt appears to be from Senate Bill 1638 in the United States Senate, proposed by Senator Feingold, and is said to be prompted by a desire to ban junkets for judges. Well, instead, it does the opposite. It bans educational programs for judges while permitting them to attend junkets. Section 5A2 of the amendment would prevent judges from accepting reimbursement from a law school for attending a program which, quote, is a significant purpose of which is the education of United States federal or state judges. Should a law school invite judges to a weekend golf tournament, no problem, but let them hear a lecture on the founders or on John Locke, and the amendment would ban reimbursement. Junkets are fine. It's education that appears to bother Senator Feingold. And just what kind of education upsets Senator Feingold? The bill is drafted narrowly to exclude programs with which the senator is likely to agree. Judges would be permitted to attend Aspen Institute programs, for example, since they would be a minority of attendees. Programs sponsored by American Lawyers for Justice, formerly the ATLA, would arguably be permitted, since that special interest group would seem to be a subject matter bar association. Quote, ABA programs are also permitted. So too are university programs such as the Harvard Law and Social Society programs for judges, because they are held under the auspices of the Federal Judicial Center. What that leaves as the principal object of Senator Feingold's wrath is essentially one thing. The George Mason Law and Economics Center, an integral part of George Mason School of Law, since the LEC's inception in 1974, its programs have always been rigorous and taught by the finest scholars. For a 5-day program, participants are required to read and discuss 500 to 600 pages of material with 21 hours of seminar. There are no entertainment events. No reimbursement of expenses is offered for spouses. Presentations are academic and theoretical, and lecturers assiduously avoid discussing hot topics such as asbestos, abortion, and affirmative action. Did you get something figured out there, John?
I think so.
Okay.
Did you
All
want
right.
to wind that up?
Well, yeah, I was going to wind
Okay,
this
sure.
up, but I just thought that was very, very interesting how they're trying to derail this reimbursement for what I would think would be an enlightening period or enlightenment things for judges to do to keep them fair and impartial.
And keep them trained.
Right, keep them trained and
keep the
keeping
skills sharpened.
Exactly.
You bet. Well, I think we may have him back on the air here. We'll give it a try as we turn to Scott Woodruff, Homeschool Legal Defense, on the subject of parental rights. Let's see if we get some sound from him.
Every year on April 30th, his anniversary, sent a nice big bouquet of flowers to my wife. He said, great, love to have to repeat this. So, flowers arrived every April 30th. Things were happy. Things went great until one April 30th, he walked into his house and saw this beautiful bouquet of flowers and said, hey, honey, who sent the flowers? Okay. By the way, you know how far it is from Terminal B to Terminal F in O'Hare Airport? Farther than you can run in 3 minutes. I proved it last night. You cannot run that far. I tried. I failed miserably. Oh, but I'm here now, and I thank the Lord for that. Let's take a moment and pray. Lord Jesus, you are our Heavenly Father, our Master, our Savior, our Lord. God, we dedicate this time to you. Father, we've come to sit at your feet and to learn. Father, if I say anything that is right and honorable and worthy, I pray that it would find a lodging place in the hearts of my listeners. If I say anything that is unworthy, I pray that you would wash it away. Come now, Lord. Speak to us, Lord. Change us to become more like our Savior Jesus. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. You know, when my wife and I started homeschooling, notice how I kind of put me and my wife on the same level there. That's really not true. Really, it's like when my wife and I started homeschooling, I even thinking about it, I was scared. And one of the biggest things I was scared about was that we would blow it and my kids wouldn't learn to read. Now, for me, reading was really, really important. I've always been sort of liking literature and reading and writing. And in high school, I remember my favorite teachers were usually English teachers. They were also the smartest teachers in the school as far as I could tell. And I both feared and admired them. So much so that when I got to college, I became an English major and actually really enjoyed it. And then after college, of course, I went to law school, which is highly word intensive. Basically, I put bread on my table by writing words, by speaking words. I don't plow fields. I don't put shingles on roofs. I don't fix cars. I don't fly airplanes. I talk, and I get paid for that, and it's a wonderful thing. And I wanted my kids, if they were so clumsy as me as not to be able to really work for a living, to be able to do that too. So it scared me to think of my kids not reading and writing. And I thought, wow, I could be condemning my kids to a lifetime of mediocrity, inferiority if they can't read. And then the thought struck me, why does anybody want that kind of responsibility? That's a lot of responsibility. Would you agree that's a lot of responsibility? Yeah. I'd like to read a quote to you from a fairly recent book by Clarence Thomas, who is, by the way, Supreme Court Justice. His book is My Grandfather's Son. And I heard him speak in Washington, D.C. recently. And on this topic of responsibility, I'd like to read you an excerpt from his book. He's talking about a conversation he had with John Bolton, who many of you have heard of in the news. One of our most fateful discussions began when I mentioned to John that I supported mandatory motorcycle helmet laws and the then new automobile seatbelt requirements. Since society bears the cost of care for people who are injured, I argued, the government had the right, if not the obligation, to take steps to reduce the risk of injury. Naturally, John thought otherwise, and we argued back and forth. Then he looked me in the eye and said, Clarence, as a member of a group that has been treated shabbily by the majority in this country, why would you want to give the government more power over your personal life? Unquote. That stopped me cold. I thought of what Daddy had said when I asked him why he'd never gone on public assistance. Quote, because it takes away your manhood, unquote, he said. Quote, you do that, and they can ask you questions about your life that are none of their business. They can come into your house when they want to. They can tell you who else can come and go in your house, unquote. Daddy and John, I saw, were making the same point. Real freedom meant independence from government intrusion, which in turn meant that you had to take responsibility for your own decisions. When the government assumes that responsibility, it takes away your freedom. As I gradually kind of got used to this homeschooling thing and began going to an occasional conference here and there and meeting families who homeschool, what I quickly found out was that there were two things homeschoolers passionately loved: freedom and responsibility. Freedom and responsibility are, in fact, two of the most powerful engines we have for making homeschooling work. Now, I'd like to address very briefly compulsory age bills. Sometimes they'll come in, they'll try to raise the age from 16 to 18. They'll try to lower it from 6 to 5. We're fighting those battles on this very session. Now, how do those affect the issue of freedom or responsibility? Well, the issue of freedom, because if your children are under compulsory attendance for more years, that's more years you have to dance to the government's tune. It's years you cannot, with total freedom, decide what to do. And it also diminishes your responsibility, because you want the responsibility of deciding for yourself exactly what should happen with children who are 16 or 17 and 5. And when the government mandates that in a clumsy one-size-fits-all, the government is taking that responsibility away from you and giving it to itself. In fact, freedom and responsibility are probably the primary reason, or one of the main reasons, we don't send kids to public school. Now, people who send their kids to public school, and perhaps many of you began with having kids in public school, but you realize that when you do that, you are delegating to the public school your responsibility of educating those kids, training them for life, and you are giving up your freedom to teach, and you're giving up your responsibility. And that delegation is what kind of withdraws you from a high level of interest in what they're doing. Now, if you've been over to the Capitol, you've noticed a lot of homeschoolers, right? Did you notice many people, many citizens, who were not homeschoolers?
Yeah.
Were there many? A few? Handfuls? Occasionally? Probably not too many. Now, there are a lot of really important bills that are moving through the legislature, not just education, but bills that affect what crimes are punishable in Iowa, how high your taxes will be, what kind of social programs will be in existence, future of various types of educations and colleges. Really important bills. If there are so many really important bills in the legislature, why are homeschoolers the only people here today? We cared enough to come. How come just about nobody else did? It's because most people treat government the same way they treat public education, by delegating it. Most people take the attitude, I will vote for my elected official. After that, I hope he does a good job, but I'm not going to be too involved. And the result is that we will tend to get a government that is as inefficient and unproductive as the public schools are, because people are not taking responsibility, people are not using their freedom to have an impact. So, you who are passionate, incredibly passionate, about the freedom and responsibility to homeschool, would you even dream of treating the government the same way? This government that in fact was created to protect your rights. I hope your answer to that is no. I hope you have found that in the field of education, by not delegating, you've experienced some pretty amazing things, some pretty amazing success. You know that it works to not delegate. And I'm here today to encourage you. Also, don't delegate in the area of government. Don't think it's somebody else's job to make sure your lawmakers are doing what they're supposed to do. Now, I don't mean to confuse you. I understand that we live in a representative democracy. That means that we don't physically go in and cast the votes for laws. We elect someone else who does. But that person you elect is supposed to do what you want. But how is he going to know what you want unless you tell him? And even if you tell him, how are you sure he's going to listen? So let me ask you this. How do you open someone's ears? If you have a 5-year-old and he's not paying attention, how do you open his ears? There are basically 3 strategies. Now, when I was 3, I figured out a way to climb out of my fenced-in backyard, over the gate, out into the great big world, out there, out yonder, had a great time. I had such a good time, I taught my 2-year-old sister how to climb out too. After which, my mom and I had a talk. I asked her later, Mom, how did you convince me to stop climbing over the fence? Did you get a taller fence? Did you beat me? Did you threaten me? How did you, once I learned the secret of getting outside, how did you convince me to stay in? And I'll tell you the answer in a second. But there are 3 ways to open a 5-year-old's ears. Number 1, threats. If you do that again, I'll take away your TV, your video games, or you can't get dessert, or whatever it might be. Number 2, you can offer goodies. If you do that, I will give you a cookie. I will take you to the pool. I will take you to the zoo. I will let you go over to your friend's house, even though you should be doing chores or whatever. Third way to open somebody's ears is to have a relationship with them. Relationships have an amazing way of opening ears. So now I'll tell you what my mom did. I said, Mom, how did you convince me to stop climbing over the fence with my little sister? She said, well, Scott, I just sat down and talked to you and told you that it was really important that you not climb over the fence, and I would really appreciate it if you didn't do it again. And you know what? That simple slight request apparently worked. I didn't climb out anymore. She didn't have to threaten me. She didn't bribe me. And the same thing will work when you're communicating with your state representative, state senator. Just think of them as a big, overgrown, wrinkly 5-year-old. Because they're really not much different. You have to get their attention. You have to open up their ears. Now, you sort of have a threat to offer. The threat could be, I won't vote for you. You sort of have a goodie you could offer. I will vote for you, or I will give you money, or I will tell my friends you're a good guy. But more powerful than that is going to be a relationship with them. So, once you have that relationship, what are your goals going to be? Okay, number 1, you want to make it clear that you're not after money. Because most of the people, frankly, who are going to come and talk to your elected representative over the next couple months, they're coming in asking for money. They either want money for a pet project, they want a tax break for their business, they want some kind of government program to establish a new government branch of whatever in their town to bring in more jobs, to create more money. And frankly, these guys have access to lots and lots of money. So when you go in, after you've established this relationship, and you make it clear you aren't after money, they're going to go, wow, gee, what could be more important than money? Second thing, once you establish a relationship, is to dispel the misconceptions they probably have about homeschooling. Because I assure you that everybody you visit, I hope either all of you either have visited or are going to visit your senator or representative this afternoon. But I assure you that they've all been visited at least once by a member of the National Education Association. Those guys have lots of money, they have lots of power, they have long memories, and they don't forgive. So he's already been visited by them. And if the subject of homeschooling came up, the NEA lobbyist probably said something like this: only certified teachers are competent to teach kids. Why do you let homeschoolers teach their own kids? You really ought to fix that problem. Now, many legislators already know this, and they've turned that down, but you may talk to some people today who have never spoken to a homeschool family. But they have spoken to the NEA lobbyists. In 1984, Nebraska passed a decent homeschool law. 3 years later, the NEA had another bill drafted that dramatically clamped down on homeschoolers. It imposed harsh new requirements, very severe, practically would have ended homeschooling as we know it. Time came for the hearing. Homeschoolers packed the hearing room. They flooded out into the aisle, flooded the halls. Many, many people testified against this bad bill. Only one testified in favor. That was the NEA lobbyist. And in very dramatic fashion, she got up, took her teacher's certificate, and said, if you don't pass this bill, if you let homeschoolers keep on teaching, I may as well tear up my license. And she literally tore up her license right in front of that committee. That's what the NEA thinks about homeschooling. Now, by the grace of God, that bill failed. But that's the kind of stuff that we're up against. So you're probably going to talk to someone who's been visited by one of their lobbyists. So how do you most quickly dispel their misconception? What the representative or senator is probably going to want to do is talk to your kids. Because he knows that's where he's really going to find out what's going on with homeschooling. And I want to encourage you, if your kids are even moderately well behaved, take them with you. They are your best advocates. As soon as this aide or the senator starts talking to your kids, he's going to find out that he can express himself. He can put two thoughts together to make a sentence. He's respectful. He's polite. He looks him straight in the eye. He doesn't hide behind his mom in fear. He has a certain level of self-confidence. And he's not going to ask him the quadratic equation or the years of battle pasting. He's going to ask him things like, what do you do in homeschool, or what do you do for fun, or what's your favorite thing to study? It's going to be simple things like that. So don't be afraid your kid's going to flunk the test. But they're asking to see, are these kids normal? Do they seem educated? And in the vast majority of cases, that lawmaker is going to come away thinking, you know what? These kids are okay. These parents are doing an okay job. And you will have just won a huge step forward, a huge victory for homeschool freedom. So the goals of this relationship that you're developing, remember, the point of a relationship is to open the ears. Once he took a picture of me doing that. Erase that now. So once you have this relationship, the goal is number one, tell them you're not after money. Number two, dispel the misconceptions by letting them talk to your kids. That was better. So by doing this, you're creating a human bridge. A human bridge. Why do bridges matter? Let me give you some more concrete examples. In 1994, a lady named Carolee Adams was, I guess, having a hard time sleeping and ended up reading a very, very thick, 1,000-page federal bill called H.R. 6. And somewhere in there, she found a little clause in this federal bill that said, everyone who teaches must have a teacher's certificate. And she looked at that and thought, well, wait a second. What would that do to homeschoolers? And she was concerned. Well, it just so happened that she had formed a human bridge. She had formed a human bridge in the office of Representative Dick Armey. So she called Dick Armey's office, and she got a hold of the guy that she had this bridge with, and he listened to her. Now, if it had been some total stranger, some just sort of person off the street, he might have said, yeah, call back in a month, or send me a memo, or yeah, I'll think about it. But because she had established a bridge, he listened very carefully to her, and he paid attention. And he took her concern to Representative Armey. And he agreed it was a problem. So very soon after that, he proposed an amendment stating that it would only apply to public school teachers. And the sponsor of the bill refused that amendment. The committee voted against the amendment. After that, Dick Armey called Mike Ferris. We alerted homeschoolers nationwide, and in a matter of days, so many calls were flooding into Washington that the Capitol switchboard was literally shut down. When the final vote was taken on H.R. 6, the vote was 434 to 1. The only person who voted for it was the sponsor. That's how effective homeschoolers were. But it started with that one human bridge. Number two, in Kentucky, when Kentucky's homeschool law was being drafted, a guy named Brother Joe, and I should know his last name but don't, but he's universally known simply as Brother Joe, got involved in the process and got to know a few representatives. And after that, every now and then, a new bill would come in the Kentucky legislature, a worse bill, and he'd go around and he'd talk to people. And they got to know him, they got to trust him. And as time went on, it turned out that every time Brother Joe went around and just talked to lawmakers, that bad bill would die. He had formed human bridges. In fact, he'd done more than that. He kind of became the chaplain for the whole Kentucky legislature. But he started out as just an ordinary homeschool dad, wanting to do his little part. Example number 3. Virginia does have a bill allowing us to do parent-taught driver education. One day I was going to have that by the grace of God. Right, Justin? We're not giving up. We're going to come back on that. I've taught all my kids how to drive, and it's been a wonderful experience. Terrific time to kind of bond with your older teens during this phase when they're right about to kind of have a lot more independence. So I really enjoyed that time. Plus, it's amazing how well they listen when they know they won't get their license if you don't approve. you have their ears. Okay. When the Virginia driver ed bill came up, a lady in the Department of Education fought us tooth and nail. The bill eventually got passed, and then she fought us tooth and nail in the implementation. We were always running into this lady who would give us a hard time. Well, about, I think 6 months ago, she decided to offer a driver ed class to herself. She herself decided to offer a driver ed class, and it quickly filled up with homeschool students. By the end of that class, she told a friend of hers, "I have totally changed my opinion about homeschoolers." She said, "What changed my mind was the dedication of these parents. I'm now a convert." A human bridge. Nobody ever intended that to happen, but those parents and those kids formed a human bridge with this woman, and now she's on our side. Georgia. Example number 4. A good bill was going through the Georgia legislature that would have established homeschooling as legal under reasonable requirements, but it was getting bottled up in the Education Committee. The powerful chairman had just said, "No, I'm not going to let a homeschool bill come through my committee." And so the bill was stalling. One homeschool family went and visited with him and just said very humbly, "I know you oppose this bill. I understand that, but I would just like you to meet my family." He spent a few minutes talking to this committee chairman, just letting him talk to his kids, meet his family, and he left. The next day, the committee chairman said, "Okay, the bill can go through." And that bill became the Georgia homeschool law, because one family cared enough to create a human bridge. Example 5, South Carolina. Then Tyler was a homeschool mom down there, and while the South Carolina's homeschool law was going through the legislature, the Department of Education was consulted. Lawmakers were thinking about the bill, and they said, "Well, we ought to know what the Department of Education thinks about this homeschool bill." And the Department of Education was primed to oppose it. And if they had, the bill would have died then and there, because for better or worse, there's a tendency for legislators to trust what departments of education say. So then Tyler went and talked to this key person in the Department of Education. And the next time he was consulted about home education, this is what he said. He said, "I don't know much about home education, but I do know Zan Tyler. And if she thinks it's a good thing, it must be so." And that one simple change of heart swung the Department of Education. The Department of Education swinging helped the entire bill go through, because one person established one human bridge. My last example, the Oklahoma Constitution. And I should have mentioned this to the fellow Hastings who spoke first this afternoon. When Oklahoma was developing its constitution, it had a convention where delegates would be sent, and they would actually have drafts of provisions and then kind of debate things. And during the debates, a provision was offered that said the law must provide that every student must attend public or private school. That would have been bad, right? Very bad. It would have basically killed homeschooling at the very beginning. But one of the delegates there knew a family who homeschooled. It was about 1908, so they probably didn't call it homeschooling. But he knew somebody who taught their own kids. And he spoke, and this is recorded in the annals of the debates of the Oklahoma Constitution. He said, I know two young fellows, and his mother and father teach him to read and write. So I think we need to make sure that's covered in the Constitution. Based on that one statement, the draft of the Oklahoma Constitution was changed to where now it says you must either attend public school, private school, or some other form of education. And it's clearly understood that that form of education is homeschooling. Because that one homeschool family had a human bridge with that delegate who attended those debates. So, why we don't want to delegate government for the same reason we don't want to delegate education. And that means establishing a relationship with legislators to open their ears. That means getting to know them personally. And if you do that, you have every reason to hope that there's going to be a day that comes when your human bridge is going to prevent a very bad bill or policy from being adopted, or help open the way for a very good policy. And you kind of know this intuitively. Probably most of you adults here have worked with the public in some form or fashion. Let me ask you this. If you're dealing with customers day in, day out, when someone you know comes to your counter, do you treat them a little bit differently than a total stranger? If you're a bank teller and they come to you to cash your check, or if you're a retail merchandiser and they come to you to buy a pair of jeans, or you're in a car wash and they come to you to wash your car, do you treat them a little bit better because you know them? Of course you do. You can't help it. Because part of our identity as human beings is to want to have this mutuality of understanding, mutuality of blessing. And so when you create a relationship with the legislator, you're creating a powerful engine of mutuality. Okay, now I'd like to give you an additional, more expanded reason of why this is really important.
Well, you've been listening to Scott Woodruff, a lawyer with the Homeschool Legal Defense, in talking about how to approach legislators. He was talking about building relationships. I picked up really the wrong tape here because I was intending to pick up one that talked about parental rights. But his organization also talks about parental rights, and they have a website called parentalrights.org, and you might want to check into that to see some of the background and information that they have been talking about with respect to parental rights. Certainly appreciate your dropping by to view and to listen to these comments. We'll see you next week.